Hello, everybody. Today I'm very pleased to bring you an episode with my good friend Natalie West. Natalie is an integrative psychotherapist and, in my opinion, an expert in the link between nutrition and mental health, a topic that I'm certainly very interested in. I think you're going to enjoy. Nat, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Simon. Good to see you again.
Likewise. Today, I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts about why it's so important to watch what we eat and to think about what we eat and how that then affects our mood, personality,
Mm,
mental health, entire life.
yeah.
To kick things off, I really want to find out how you got into this space, how you discovered this link, and what your origin story is.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's funny. I didn't go searching for it. It kind of found me, really. So taking people back, I guess, just to kind of understand where I've come from, just in my own background, even before I kind of found carnivore and, the work that I do. So, growing up, I was surrounded, especially my mum, she had a mental health, concern, and there was a lots of, mental health concerns within my family. So I was really exposed to that quite early on. And I grew up very quickly as a child. So most people would probably understand that if they have a parent that has a mental health issue, then, you are kind of forced into that environment of growing up really quickly. So for me, it always just fascinated me very, very young. Like even at the age of 8, I remember really being fascinated with the mental health or psychology behind why people do what they do. And as weird as this is going to sound, but I found myself reading, books and researches on, psychopaths and psycho killers and serial killers, and why they do those side of certain behaviors. So really, really young, it was something that I just, I think attracted me. But even my own mental health struggles was, things like, lack of self-worth and lack of self-image, and, all of those things that you basically learn from your own upbringing, your environment. So to me, I didn't really understand that that was, learnt behavior at the time. But I did have great social connections at schools and things like that. So I'm still friends with a lot of my friends that I went to school with. So which is really, really important. But I left home at 17. That was kind of my escapism, I think is the best way to describe it. I jumped on a plane from Brisbane to Melbourne with a bunch of strangers, had my first sales job, and I just was like, right, knocking on doors, commission only. If I didn't sell, I didn't eat. So
Love
it
it.
was, yeah, it was a pretty amazing adventure. And but you know what? When I look back now, Simon, I didn't even think about not selling or worrying about not eating. It was just a default pattern. But I also understand now that that was also elevated flood or flight response and
Mm.
survival and things like that. So I went down the path of, quite destructive behaviors, with food and, using food as I guess, a potential marker to look a certain way, very unhealthy, eating habits. And then I found myself in the bodybuilding industry, which again is really not healthy. But I didn't know at that time, right? So still fascinated though. Even I went into corporate world after that. And again, mindset around why people said no, why do people say yes, and the psychology of egos and corporate behavior and all of those kind of things just really fascinated me. So I knew somewhere along the line that I would end up working for myself, but I just didn't really know how or why. I just had to trust the process. But for me, it was trying to find, I guess, myself in an environment where I obviously grew up in, but trying to find who I was. Then working in corporate, then went into bodybuilding. And again, now understanding I was coming from a very conflicted self image. So I use training and bodybuilding as a way to seek unconscious validation. Not that I knew that then because I wasn't a therapist back then. But it was a very, very destructive path where you would diet and then you'd gorge yourself and diet, and then you're kind of on that roller coaster all the time. So that was 3 years of doing that and just being really what I thought was disciplined, which really wasn't. And that long term created a disordered eating habit, which then again was reflective of the internal environment with my childhood of just being very dysregulated. So I had a very dysregulated nervous system. So doing those things caused unconscious dysregulation, but which what I felt was in control, which in fact wasn't. It's actually quite out of control. But then moving out of that and then finding years later, I was always kind of, once I'd done bodybuilding, what you would call a healthy eater. Wasn't really driven towards huge processed foods like McDonald's, things like that. I never touched those kind of things. But it was more the weighing of food and disordered habits and, restricting myself if I'd eaten something over my calorie limit. So you become very calorie controlled when you're a bodybuilder. And then basically once you're off a diet, you just gorge, which is really bad. And I think if you look at the industry as a whole, I don't think there's anyone in there that can manage that process well. I know there's a lot of people here in Australia and America that I know, same, come out, disordered patterns, really, really bad. And then you've got an addiction to exercise as well. So you're kind of fueling, your dietary patterns within the exercise to kind of say, well, then I've got to burn off what I've eaten. Yeah. So I kind of traveled that path for a while, but then, after being in corporate for 20 years, I was just like, you know what, I might look at psychology. And then I had my son, and then I realized, he's nearly 19 this year. So then that point for me was like, I don't want to work 9 to 5. I don't want to work for anyone else, let alone I'd rather work 80 hours for myself than 40 for someone else. So I went down the path of psychology, and there was something out of alignment with me. I was like, something doesn't add up for me, because I'm thinking, well, I've seen my mum in therapy for many, many years, didn't help, medication, years and years of this. And also not just my mum, lots of other people within the family that also had other kind of addictions, alcohol, drugs, those kind of things. So, it fascinated to me as to why, like, well, hold on, there's something wrong here. What's going on? And no one talked about nutrition. That was never, ever talked about, but it was more around chemical imbalance in the brain, which again, we now know is not true. But at that point in time, I remember still questioning it, because I remember my mum saying to me, like, I've been told I have a chemical imbalance in my brain. I'm like, oh, how? What did they test for that? And it's like, oh, no, there's no test. They just tell you that. And I'm like, okay. And just as, this was like when I was mid-20s, and I'm like, don't you test for those things? So understanding that, and then by chance, not, again, nothing ever happens by accident. I was asked to go to a seminar where there was a psychotherapist there. And I didn't really understand. I was like, okay, I'm sure it's the same as psychology. But no, it wasn't. He also spoke about the unconscious, conscious mind, but also the body. And that was the first time that I'd heard in any psychology kind of training where they move from the chin down. So psychology is the chin up. That's it. Yeah. So for me, I was like, what does he mean by that? And then he was talking about the link between the gut-brain axis and nutrition and mental health. And I'm like, wow, where's this guy? So he went through everything, and I was just blown away by that. Makes sense. And if we're got components of our brain and our body where we're not methylating, for example, that's a methylation process in the body where the cofactors don't work. So you're not uptaking nutrients, your brain is not working properly, your nervous system's not working properly, and we're not talking about food. I was like, that's interesting. So I had a conversation with him at the end of that, and I just said, wow, I just want to know everything that you've done and how did you get to that point. And he had done the same thing. He had gone down the psychology route and then knew that something wasn't right. So he ended up then finding Linus Pauling, Abram Hoffer. They are pioneers of what they called psychonutrition.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they're both, one's a psychiatrist and one was a physicist, and understood the mechanics of physics, energy, right? So they kind of the pioneers of that, but then back then they were kind of, I guess, called quacks. So then leading into kind of modern world, Dr. Andrew Sewell in the US would talk about orthomolecular nutrition and orthomolecular medicine, which again is psychonutrition. So that's kind of the old language term of it. And in 2 hours of talking with him, everything just was laid out in front of me. And I went, that's why no one's getting better, because no one's talking about the power of what real food is. And nowadays we're not eating that. It's all, Franken food, as I call it, disguised under balance and moderation. But even for me, that was enough for me to understand why I had my own certain patterns, and even talking to him around the unconscious patterning and programming and self-image. Simon, it was just like a huge, like 1,000 light bulbs going off in my head.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's what I want to do. That's what I need to do. Not one for myself, to understand myself and to heal myself, but then to help people understand that wherever you come from, wherever your programming is, your childhood does not denote where you will end up. And I'm living proof of that, because, dealing with that childhood of, psych wards, things like that, you would think that I would have grown up to be quite a similar replication of that, which can happen. But it doesn't have to.
Amazing. So do you think that, well, you were so receptive to this message, and once you heard them talking about, psychology and food and nutrition, you just knew instantly that's right. I mean, do you think it's the bodybuilding background, or your mother's experience, or what was it that just clicked for you?
I think it was just a culmination of everything, like I'd never heard of these seminars before. I didn't even know what a psychotherapist was,
Mm.
let alone understanding even what, waking state of hypnosis was. So me sitting there in my own conscious state, but also my unconscious awareness, now that I know what it is,
Mm.
everything that he said was just literally, I guess, stepping stones for me to understand what had been happening and why that had been happening. So I knew, well, I wasn't broken. There was nothing wrong with me. I just didn't understand how my mind worked and why I absorbed these patterns and environments, So I was like, wow, like it all just fell
Mm.
immediately. And I'm like, okay, now what? Like,
Yeah.
what do I do now? And I said to him, what do I do? And he said, well, firstly, you need to understand how you work,
Mm.
why you do what you do. And then you have to understand how food has an impact on you, heal that, come back to yourself consciously. Then you have the ability to help other people, because you're not going to be overlaying any of your unconscious patterns and behaviors in a session with anyone,
Mm.
because
Interesting.
you don't get triggered.
Yeah. So were these people, I mean, what sort of nutrition were these people talking about? Like, were they ketogenic, or what were they?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a low carb, yeah, and that's kind of low carby. Fats were fine, protein low, but they didn't talk about oxalates and things like that. It was just very much a very lower carb, kind of 50
Great.
grams.
Mhm.
But the other part of that was would be just maybe 3 meals a day and potentially some kind of protein things in the middle, but that just depended on the person. But you know if we go back even to the 1900s, people were talking about eating meat and fat. So it's not new, and it's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. But for me, being in the bodybuilding industry, it was so far removed from what I had
Mm.
been told. Carb, no fat. It was just totally like, wow, now I know why I've got the problems that I have. And not even just that, I ended up, every time I'd eat, I'd be starving like 45 minutes later. And I knew that that's something wrong, which then ended up being insulin resistant. So,
Mhm.
eating that way got me into that. And then, but still not knowing really the unconscious part of that and the attachment to food and my behaviors, that's when I kind of went down the traveling path of going, okay, what do I need to do to become you?
Yeah.
Effectively, I was like, that you are the pinnacle of what I want to achieve. So, and then I just had to start again. I had to go back and do, clinical hypnosis, lots of different, psychotherapy training, to really, one, go through my own. So even with my hypnotherapy training, that was all around me understanding me and going through my breakthroughs, but then also going down the path of orthomolecular nutrition.
Interesting. I mean, before you mentioned a phrase, waking state of hypnosis. What is that, Nat? And what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So basically, as children, so between the age of 0 to 7 and 7 to 12. So we are literally an absorption of programs. So we absorb everything we hear, see, taste, touch, smell in our environments. Anyone in authority to us basically is driving our patterns and our behaviors and our beliefs and our values. So as a waking state of hypnosis, we hypnotize ourselves by doing the same things over and over and over because we're very unconscious. So 95% of what we do is in a waking state of unconscious patterns. So what gets repeated gets rewarded.
Yeah.
So when you are conscious, you have the understanding of going, right, I've kind of got to wake myself up out of this slumber, and stop repeating the same things that I know don't serve me. But your unconscious is extremely powerful. It has a set of programs. So we've got the hardware. If you think about your brain and your bones and all of those, that's our hardware. But our software comes from that really strong environment, between 0 to 7 and 7 to 14. So it's not until we hit 13, 14 where the analytical part, conscious part, starts to question ourselves, our environment, who we are. And literally most people, though, unfortunately, will live in a state of unconscious hypnosis for most of their lives and keep repeating the same patterns. So that's also where family cycle patterns come from. So, when you hear of patterns of cycle of mental health or whatever it may be, it's like, oh, if your parents have depression or your parents have this, then it's likely you're going to get it. And I was told that. I was told that. If there's alcoholism in your family, you're going to end up like one. And now that I know how powerful that statement and that language is, like, that's not what you tell people. Because if your self-worth or your self-image is very conflicted and you don't know who you are, then you're going to believe it. And your mind's going to go, okay, well, that's comfortable because we like familiarity. Well, our mind does. Yeah. So, you look through a lens of, and if I look back through my lens, I knew that I was in a waking state of hypnosis where I was just doing the same things over and over and over. And maybe having some conscious awareness around, oh, I want something different. I want something to change, but it never would. I would just default back the whole time.
Mm. Switching back to the nutrition, so when you started experimenting on yourself,
Yeah.
what did you do, and how did you get towards carnivore?
Well, it was really, I was forced to. It wasn't that, again, I didn't find it. It found me, because I had a blood test done, and he had said to me that I was borderline diabetic, which then related to me was insulin resistance, because every single time I ate, I'd be starving. And that would happen all day. People would make fun of me because they're like, you just better
You're
bring your
always
lunchbox
snacking.
with you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no. So had that, and then I was just like, no, I'm going to reverse this because I understand what insulin resistance is. Right back then I didn't, but now I do. So for me, it was just researching and going, okay, go back
Mhm.
to really the default of, well, what is low carb? I understand that it's protein and fat, even though I had a conflict in my head saying to me, am I really going to be okay without vegetables? So
Yeah.
it's still me going through my own conflicts with it, right? And I'm like, well, what's the worst thing could happen in 90 days? Like, honestly. So that's what I came from. And I'm like, give it a go. That was my ultimate goal. My ultimate goal was not to lose weight. And actually, side effect of that, I lost my asthma, my hay fever, and that was just, you know, a bonus, but then my insulin resistance also reversed. And that was only going to be for 90 days. And that's 6 years later. But I found Paul Mason. That's kind of where I went down the rabbit hole.
Gotcha.
And literally I was like, okay, done. Bang, next day. And
Yeah.
here I am.
Yeah. Paul Mason's content's fantastic because it's so technical, so scientific. I sometimes will watch it and then I'll watch the previous minutes
Yes.
back again, and then I'll try and understand it. And it's very well researched and well thought out. So I agree. Paul Mason's a great one to learn from.
Yeah, yeah. So, and again, it all made sense to me, but then I kind of wanted to dive deeper into more, again, now what they call nutritional psychiatry.
Mm.
So, following Dr. Chris Palmer and Georgia Ede. So, I went through an American integrative psychiatric industry. Integrative Psychiatric Institute, where they were doing nutritional psychiatry as a certification. So I just completed that in January. So very different from psychonutrition as an old compared to now. So they're definitely more of a kinergetic, high fat kind of protocol, and or obviously carnivore as well. They have some other elements, but it's all depending on the person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, how has your nutrition evolved now? I mean, it's been what, 6 years?
Yeah, yeah. It really hasn't changed very much. I'm just give me a ribeye for breakfast and I'm done, or some eggs and some steak. So my biggest meal is in the morning. So it's my fattiest meal. And then, I'll normally eat between 2 to 3 p.m. So again, I'm in order with my circadian rhythm. So I
Mhm.
used to wake up not hungry, and I didn't realize at the time that's a problem from where I was sitting. So now I'm within half an hour I'm eating, and my body's telling me eat. And then between 2 to 3, I'll again have some more steak, maybe have some organic chicken with lots of skin on it. Yeah, that's pretty much all I've been eating for 6 years, and
Mhm.
I love it. I don't miss anything. I don't crave anything, because also craving is emotional, not physical. Um, so I would never need to go anywhere else. It served me. I feel great. And especially, being on the other side of going through, women as they do in their cycle process, I think that really set me up. It's such a strong foundation, because when I'd done that, I wasn't going through, menopause and all of that perimenopausal situation. But now I don't have any symptoms at all. And I think that's because I started really early.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It helped you sort of sail through.
Yeah. But the other thing, Simon, that it did, which I didn't realize, that so when I was still weighing food and I was still counting calories, right?
Mhm.
Because that was a deep inset program to me because of that validation and self worth. But the minute I went carnivore, and after that 3 months, that all went away. Like it just was like a light switch. There was no need for me to ever weigh my food, count my calories, put it into Fitness Pal like crazy. That
Mhm.
was another side effect that I didn't expect to just remove from my head.
Yeah, that must have been such a relief.
It was, yeah. But just even mental health, I'm a completely different person, completely different. But that's also because of the work that I've done on myself. Because if you want a different life, you do have to become a different person,
Yeah.
different thinking. You do.
Mm. I want to talk about exactly that. Um, I've experienced that your subconscious mind is just so powerful. And even in some circumstances, like I'm totally aware that my subconscious is kind of sabotaging me.
Yep.
And I'm trying to tell myself that's not the case. That's not real. Don't worry about that. Just move on. But I know it's affecting me because sometimes I can see it in myself.
Yeah.
Stress will be almost eating away at me, or I'll snap and it'll affect the way that I am in some sort of circumstance. And I'm like, but I've been telling myself that's not true.
Yeah.
How do you, I don't even know the right terminology for it. How do you better cooperate with your subconscious?
We have to make friends with it. And, I know sometimes it feels like it's out to get us, but it's also
Mm.
around the instructions. We have to be really still, because if we are living in our environment, we're not going to get the stillness that we need to be able to hear ourselves unconsciously, but to also create new instructions that our mind needs from a conscious point, not an unconscious conflict. So we are absolutely patterned and programmed to live in the environment, people, places, things, careers, purpose, all those things. But what we're missing is that's not where we find home or ourselves. We must come back to ourselves, and we must understand what is the state that I'm operating in when, with a relationship with myself, my mind, my body, and what am I doing to be able to hear that, to be still, to be connected to my heart and my brain. Like
Mm.
it's all about coming back to self.
So it's making sure that your state is somewhere is a place where you are more in control,
Conscious,
more calm, more happy,
conscious,
conscious, right?
because we're so unconscious. Yeah, because it'll always just pick up that default, because that's just the software, right? So when we work off old software, that's just going to get kept repeating and repeating. But we can't get new software or create new software if we're not present, because we're either in the past or the future, right?
Mm.
And we can't find joy, happiness, anything there. We've got to be able to understand, to get myself into a conscious mind state, I have to also get my body into a conscious state, because our minds work off two things, and then our body follows: an image and an emotion. So image, emotion creates an outcome over and over and over. So if we want to create new outcomes, we have to create new images and new emotions, new feelings. We can't feel anything in the past unless we go back and find it, or we can create anything we want to feel in the future that doesn't even exist. But our bodies will follow exactly the instructions that we give it. So we can
Mm.
actually become addicted and conditioned to a feeling of stress, anxiousness,
Mm.
overwhelm, just from an image or a story or a thought that we've created. So, I get people to think about the future and they get anxious.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you're not present. You're out there. Or think about the past. Your mind's going to go, well, what happened in the past? Bring up a thought and an image. Sorry, an image and a feeling. You're going to be back there immediately. So it's a retraining process where you've got to be within the conscious state of your mind, which is stillness and anchoring in your body.
So
That's
how
the
how can
only
I,
place you create new software.
yeah, how can you look into the future and sort of create a new life for yourself or a new
Mm-hmm.
image or new person, but also still be in the present?
Well, you have to do it now. So, for example, if you want to create something in the future, say, I don't know, a new career or a relationship or whatever, what we normally
Mhm.
do, we wait for that to happen, to then feel something, or to feel success, or to feel like we've achieved something. Your future visions are only replicated from your conscious present moment.
Mm.
So you get to feel that now. So you have to change your state of being to feel happiness, joy right here, right now. And a lot
Mm.
of people are like, well, I don't really have much joy or happiness to, feel. I'm like, well, guess what? You have to change and train your body to feel it now before you've actually created it or
Mm.
created an experience to feel it.
Mm.
If you want
Yeah,
something different, you don't wait for it to happen out there. Yes, your mind needs an image to create a vision, but it's the state of being in your energetic state that is the key.
Mm.
That's the
So
key.
you almost live it now and
Now,
you see it and you experience it now, and then almost reality will follow.
correct. But the part of that is understanding that you also have to know what that feeling and that relationship is like with yourself, so you don't lack anything. Because when we lack something, it's like we don't have it because we're not worthy, or the environment hasn't given it to us. No, no, no. Everything is energy. So if your energy matching your current environment, you're going to get your current environment.
Mm.
So if you start energy matching yourself in a different way, as in train your mind and your body to come back home and have a very strong connection of love, respect with yourself, because they hold energy. So your body then gets recalibrated to go, well, I created this. No one can take it away from me. But if you create something externally, well, guess what's going to happen then?
Something external will happen and it could get taken away.
Well, again, if you're anchoring your worth or your happiness or your joy in a people, place, or a thing, and that gets taken away, then we go with it. So when you hold the power to go, well, I get to choose my state of being every single day, and that's peace, calm, excitement to create, but it all has to come back from yourself and the relationship that you have with yourself, how you talk to yourself. Because if you talk to yourself really badly and really negative, but you want something out there that's really cool, how do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, forget it. Yeah.
No, we are energetic beings, and that's why, as hard as it is, when we find that we want to change something outside or change a situation, or we can't change any person, that's not our job, right? But our role is to come back to ourselves and say, right, if I want a different environment to live in and I want a different life, I have to come back and create a whole different state within myself. Because then when you do that, when you look at the things externally, there's no longer an attachment to them, because you feel consciously empowered and involved. Yeah.
So say you were working with somebody hypothetically who has let their health deteriorate, and maybe not intentionally, but because they've followed the standard dietary guidelines and they've done everything their doctor and their nutritionist said, things are just getting more and more off track. What are some of the ways that you can help people to get their health and their life back on track? Let's say it's a woman who's going through menopause.
Yep. Great. I've got many of them I'm working with right now. So, again, the most problem with those things is our programming around chasing a smaller body. Like, that's a very strong pattern in women's upbringing. We're looking at the wrong thing. What we need to do is understand, if we keep chasing a smaller body, we're going to get stressed, we're going to get anxious, we're going to get depressed, and we're going to eat, because our emotions are hooked up in that, right? So what I do is I start with the fact that let's understand how your mind works, why it's seeking and hunting that, where did that come from? Secondly, what are the values with yourself? What's the relationship like with yourself? Because that is indicative of behavior, whether it's food, alcohol, or drugs. So that's the reflection. So if we've got, standard Australian diet or lots of junk food, then we know that that's a chaos process, right? So again, we've got to come back and say, okay, I know that's not good for me, but at an unconscious level, that's serving some value for me that doesn't feel worthy, or I don't know who I am without eating these foods. So I don't talk about food straight away. I don't implement any kind of nutritional changes until at least 2 to 3 weeks, because the nervous system, the mind, they have to understand their values, what's unconscious, what's conscious. So then when they're making conscious choices around nutrition, it's far easier. Yeah. Because if you introduce food again and say, okay, so I've been eating a crappy diet, and then we're going to go say ketogenic or carnivore, we're still dealing with the underlying issues here of no value. There's no value in that food. They've had value in the other food because it served an emotional anchor. Yeah.
Yep. So there's no appeal or no attraction to, what we know are healthy foods, because they're almost, it doesn't necessarily align with their values because they haven't established what they are. Correct. But until they do, there's not going to be any kind of sustainable maintenance link or attraction. Because I know for you and I'm so attracted to eating fatty meat, once or twice a day, because I know that loops around and aligns with my values of, being clear-minded and being healthy and having energy and, having good mental health and all that sort of thing.
Correct. So that's exactly what it is. So it's a value structure that we've built. So what we do is we're valuing our mental and metabolic health. So when that is a high value, both consciously and unconsciously and in your body, you choose automatically what foods are going to feed that value, right? So that's why it's a no-brainer for us to go steak, whatever. We don't think about it. We just choose it because your mind has gone, that's what you want. That's the alignment. That's what feeds you. So you get to choose that instruction. But most people don't have a value on their health. And I know that sounds weird because you would think, well, yes, of course I do. Well, you don't, because if you did have a really congruent and conscious value on your mental and metabolic health, you wouldn't be choosing the things that you're choosing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we switch it. We turn it upside
Yeah.
down.
I think a lot of people are moving, they're making healthy choices almost out of like a punishment to themselves. Do you know what I mean? And they're sort of
Yeah.
like they're making up for lost time, and then there's starvation, and there's angst, and there's eating unpleasant things, things that don't
Yes.
even taste nice,
Yeah. Yeah.
purely as a you've been bad. You need to
Yes.
fix this.
Yeah, correct. So, and again, that's a very unconscious pattern. So, when you've got the dialogue in your head that, oh, I've gone off my diet, automatically then you've got this pattern already that serves you to say, well, then I'm just going to go and gorge myself and eat and just wipe myself out. So that's a value problem. So, but what we're doing, we're looking at the wrong anchor. So we're putting the value on the food instead of the value. So, for example, the junk food, instead of the value on yourself. So, when you have a value on yourself, you don't choose things that cause you conflict. You don't choose things that cause you pain or suffering, but you have to be conscious enough to aware to know where you are causing your own self-suffering, because humans are amazing at it.
Yes,
We are
experts.
amazing at it, but
Yeah.
we can also be amazing at doing the opposite,
Mm.
which is creating a space to be in peace.
Yeah. How do you help somebody work out what their values are?
So there's a very specific way that I go through, and they have a certain module that they go through for me. And a lot of the time, though, the first process of that is they're all outside themselves, but it's to teach people where their mind travels to when you think about values. And then we work through the second phase of that form and that module and go through some specific exercises on Zoom and generally all face to face so that people know unconsciously or consciously what values are and where they don't exist. So there's a lot of, think about a value of self-respect, right? Most people would know that they would give other people respect. But when we bring it back inward, it's like, well, what do you do? What does it look like and sound like and feel like for you? What's your self-respect?
Mm.
And a lot of the time it's not there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I have to take them through a process to embed them. So they get very specific steps every week to embed them. So they become very, very more conscious around where they're choosing from. So if someone's been addicted to, I don't know, crap food, and all of a sudden now they've got this conscious conflict where they're like, hold on, that I would normally grab without thinking about it does not reflect my value. So it's raising your identity and raising your vibrational state over and above something on a plate, as in biscuits or cake or whatever it may be.
What do you think about like visualization exercises where you're putting yourself in the shoes of the person you want to become?
Yep.
So, for example, I've heard, that you can do things like vision boards where you'll put together words and imagery of the life that you're moving towards.
Yep.
And that might include your values. Or I've heard of people doing like a letter as well, where I think you write a letter, you'll know it from your future self.
Yeah. So, for example, with vision boards, a lot of the time we look at things, right? Whether it's houses, cars, boats, or whatever, right? And there's such a disconnect because it's like these things are here, but you're operating from a very low vibrational state of self and you've got no self-worth and no value in yourself. How do you think that that's even going to be created? Because the thing is, it's not about the value of things. It's the value of you.
Mm.
And understanding when you feel that, all of that stuff does not hold an authority over you. And visualization is very powerful because, again, your mind needs an image and an emotion. So that's why you've got to be mindful of what you're thinking, because you will actually think yourself into a life that's pretty predictable and sometimes pretty not great. And your language also supports it. So, when I listen to people and I'm talking to them, I can hear all of this unconscious language patterns that's embedding their lack of worth every single time they say something. And people don't realize the power that has every single time. So that's why reframing language patterns and saying, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or I should do that. Nope. We get to choose. Where are you choosing from, consciously or unconsciously? So vibrational energy, and that's why I use a very specific stillness process and a breathing process with my clients, because most people are not in their bodies. They're in here, and you can't think yourself out of anxiety, stress, or overwhelm. You have to drop it into your body and move that process through the body. So then your mind goes, oh, this is new. What are we doing here? The more you do it, then that becomes a new pattern.
So really like an awareness that your whole body is involved in this.
Every part of your state of being, mind, body, spirit, it has to be, because we are so disconnected to self. And that's why the work that I do, it's extremely uncomfortable, because it all comes back to us. It all comes back to being in you, but not being in the old you, it's being in the new you. And what's there is nothing most of the time. That's what we have to change the software and build new software patterns. Effectively, that's what it is. New thoughts, new feelings, new behaviors, new words, new language.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you saying? What's there is nothing, because what was there previously is like all subconscious. We didn't choose it.
We didn't choose it. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. We didn't choose any of it.
Mm.
But when we are aware of the difference between choosing consciously and what's in alignment with a value structure, everything changes. Everything. And it's the same thing when you change your eating habits. Everyone is such like very strong opinions and, all of those kind of things. But when you understand that your job is not to manage other people's thoughts, feelings, or reactions, if you're putting yourself first and your value first, and that's in alignment with you, then it doesn't matter. We're not here to manage that process for other people.
Yeah. Yeah. You probably develop an awareness that other people don't care as well. I find that's a big
well, you become like, even this week I've had two ladies that have said to me, like, they're 7 weeks in, and they're like, I cannot believe that I can go somewhere where my family used to pick on me and they're still picking on me, but I actually don't care. I'm just sitting there consciously present, and I'm like, I do me, you do you. Whereas before that would have been huge arguments and triggers and constant, going over the same thing, which then again puts you back in the past. So that's a trigger to go back to the past. And she's like, all my cravings are gone. She goes, did I ever think that I would be waking up and eating a ribeye for breakfast and having no cravings after 45 years, 7 weeks in? She's like, I can't explain it.
because
but it's
that
value.
yeah, I don't know, like that trigger or that button within you, it's so easy for us to blame someone else and say, you pressed my button or you triggered me.
Yeah,
But
no.
but it's within us because we've subconsciously chosen to have that there.
Well, the other big thing about self-awareness and consciousness is every single person that causes a trigger in you is a mirror that you need to look at within yourself. We are huge mirrors to every single, thing around us. So if people just, you'll hear people say, oh, why do these things keep happening to me? Or I keep attracting the same kind of people. You're like, well, that's an unconscious pattern that you have to look at within yourself. So if you're chasing love or, chasing unemotionally available people or using food to do that, that's an invitation to say, hey, what's going on within me? What is the part of myself that's triggering, reacting to that? And that's what I get my clients to do. I actually get them to look for the triggers, because then they don't trigger themselves at all, because it's like, oh, what did I learn about myself? Well, if I was triggered because I didn't speak up, I didn't speak my truth, I filtered who I was, I didn't speak up when I needed to. But remember, most people's children probably spoke out and got shut down.
Yeah.
So you carry that as an adult. So as in your adult life, if you can't, or you get triggered by a parent, for example, then that's an inner conflict of environmental, your unconscious is basically competing with their unconscious environment of you as a child. So whenever you go into a relationship, that's a really important thing too. Like you are in a relationship with each other's childhood.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But then if you add the fuel to the fire with that and you eat really unhealthily, then that's just going to exacerbate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all about coming home to conscious self. And, you know, I can say just for myself, you know, like I said earlier, wherever you're at and wherever your programming's been, that does not have to be your future, but you get to change your future in the conscious present moment. You don't wait for 5 years or 10 years to change it, because nothing will change. You have to do it now. And that's the most uncomfortable bit.
And it involves working out what your values are.
It really does. And it's uncomfortable because a lot of people don't have them internally. We have lots externally, but they don't serve us a lot of the time either. Because if we're, you know, being loyal to someone else externally or holding onto a secret, but we're not loyal to ourselves, like, well, that's not a value, is it?
Yeah.
So, you know, if we're, you know, best mate tells you something, you're like, oh, you know, that's loyalty, I'm going to keep that, you know. But do we do that with ourselves? No, we don't. We break our promises to ourselves all the time. It's the same thing when you start an eating protocol, right? It's like, if you keep saying to yourself, oh, I did it wrong, or oh, I jumped off the bandwagon. I hear it a lot. And that's a lot of thing in the community you'll hear. And it's like, no, you didn't. Because if you keep saying you're jumping off the bandwagon, you're in the past again, in the past. So you're actually programming yourself to stay there. You didn't jump off anything. You just chose. So when you choose, it's a very different energy that you carry between, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and now I'm off. Oh, I'm just going to sabotage everything, versus going, hold on, I chose. Why did I choose? Because normally we dropped our values.
Yeah. Yeah. It requires having a sort of a deep look at yourself and a deep discussion about what's really important. But I completely know what you mean, where it's, you can actually make decisions and you can shape your whole life once you know what your values are.
100%. And they hold boundaries for you, and they're amazing, you know, and they will then hold you accountable in what the life that you want to create. One within yourself first, which then will lead to the life that you want, not the one on default. Yeah. Because I could have landed on default land, you know, many, many times. But again, I think the interjection of that intersection of my training, there was a reason why I was meant to be in that room that day, because had that not happened, then I think I would have been in a very different situation.
Yeah. Stuck in the old same loops.
Yeah, I probably would have still been bodybuilding and, you know, doing silly things and counting calories and, you know, yeah, being in not a very mentally healthy space.
Yeah. Well, Natalie West, thank you so much. That was a really interesting conversation. I think I always learn a lot when I chat with you. And
Thank you.
you know,
Yeah.
like right now I'm sort of thinking, okay, well, I want to go away and absolutely nail my values and then just return to those to train the subconscious to ensure that I'm working in the direction that I actually want to go in.
Correct. So really it's about going, okay, so if self-respect is one, right? Then what you've got to do, be able to every single day go, right, I'm going to wake up every morning and I'm going to choose one value every morning. So then what you're doing, you're holding yourself consciously accountable so that every single thing that you do, say, touch, smell, whatever, wherever you are, you have to be in alignment with that value that you've chose consciously in that morning. So then at the end of the evening, when you get back to your journal, you then have to write down, how did I hold myself accountable to being respectful to myself today? Then the next part of that is like, what does it look like? What did it sound like? And what did it feel like? So you have to go through the process to give your mind and your body a reflection of like, well, I chose that, which made me feel good. So then your mind's getting embedded with the same anchor, because otherwise it'll just go back to default and it won't change. But firstly, you have to understand what they are.
Yeah. Is there just a quick one? Is there a way? Because I worry that some people might choose values that aren't actually helpful to them.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. There's a difference between doing it unconsciously or consciously,
Yeah. Okay.
or unconsciously them being in the environment. So, for example, someone will say, oh, yeah, they'll list them out for me. And I'm like, okay, so they've got kindness or love or
Yeah.
respect. And I'll go through them. I say, okay, so tell me what kindness looks like and sounds like and feels like for you. And they're like, oh, that doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
That's the problem, right? So it's like, okay, well, now how do we make kindness a value that's in alignment with your unconscious and conscious, but also your body? That's a very different story, because if you keep talking to yourself badly or choosing things that aren't very kind, you've got to hold yourself accountable and go, right, I'm not choosing that today because I know that's not kindness. So it doesn't take long. Like, you just got to have those small choices every single day that go, that's not in alignment with my value, not doing it. It's hard in the beginning because it's conflict, because your mind's like, come on, I've had 20 years of this. Let's do it. Like,
Yeah,
right? What
yeah,
else are we
exactly. It's
doing?
when
Yeah.
yeah, you
But
just default back to your old
that's
ways. Yeah.
easy, right? It's not easy because pleasure also ends up in pain most of the time when you're coming from that space. If you think of pleasure as having a donut, well, guess what? The pain is going to happen within 8 minutes later.
Yeah, not worth it.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Okay, Natalie, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Welcome.
Yeah, great to
Yeah.
chat, and I think people are gonna get a lot out of
Thank
this
you.
conversation.
Yeah, I think the biggest message, Simon, for me today, I think sharing, you know, my environment. And I think it's really important because I meet people in the same situation where they're living in this state where they just don't think that they can change, or that their life is kind of being pre-written for them. It doesn't have to be. You can
Not the
totally
case.
change your whole life, but you've got to change you first.
On that note, thank you, Natalie.
Thank you.